Hey, what's up, and welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam. Welcome back, listeners. Glad you're here.
Yeah. Just want to say, and I want to say this every so often, EST, it stands for established. That's the name of the show. It's EST. Sometimes people are like, is that est? And no, it's EST. And what does it stand for? Well, it stands for established churches, as opposed to a church plant. That's our niche. Do you call it niche or niche? I don't know how to say that word.
I say both. I've heard niche and niche, and it's one of these words like harassment or harassment. I don't even know anymore. I just get so confused, and everyone says it differently. I will say this: it's a pop, all right. If you want, to get
soda.
If you want a fizzy drink out of the pop machine, that's what you do. But I know I'm in the minority there, and most of our listeners. Yeah, most listeners are probably cringing at all this. I don't even know how to talk. I've lived in so many different places, Florida, Indiana, and everywhere in between, that it just depends. Like I don't know how to talk. Which accent do I use? I had some time that I spent in Kentucky. I went to high school 4 years in Kentucky, so my wife speaks Kentucky. It is a different language, and I don't even know, but there you go.
It's okay.
We're just bantering at this point.
The bottom line is this is our niche market. The EST, that's our specialized area. And we do have a resource for those in established churches and in church plants. It's called Church Teams.
Yeah, well, Church Teams is for everyone. 97% of Americans text daily. So let that sink in. Like, everybody texts. And if you're not using text to church systems, you need to. This is how we communicate at West Bradenton. We have an email newsletter that goes out twice a week. But if we're sending notifications for meetings or what have you, in fact, VBS meeting right after this recording, and I got a text reminder from my children's minister, Brandy, and I now know to show up. So we use texting a lot at West Bradenton. If you're not, you need to start doing that. And Church Teams offers text to church. It's part of their ever-growing system that is everything you need for software. So go to est.church and check out the free offer that they have. You can sign up for a little mini consult. They'll help you out with your needs. So thank you, Church Teams, for sponsoring the show. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And for those of you who, thinking about a switch or need church management software, or certainly text to church ability, go to est.church and contact Church Teams.
Absolutely. So we've got speaking of church teams, many of our listeners have a team of staff, some people at the church that they are often managing. Most of our listeners, I do believe, are somehow the managers of their church in different regards. And here's one of those tricky situations. What do you do about staff accountability? What does it mean? Is it even biblical, Sam? Aren't we supposed to be different than the business world? And that's something that they do. We don't need to do accountability. We're all Christians here. What say you to that topic in general?
Well, I do have some strong opinions about this, and I'm going to share them on this show. It's an article I wrote a little while ago, and it got some traction, so I kind of want to expand upon what was in the article. You can find the article at churchanswers.com if you want to go there and check it out. But, there's a lot of, let me just be real, there's been a lot of moral failures out there and a lot of major problems in churches that could have been prevented. I can't tell you how many times through the work of Church Answers that we've encountered embezzlement issues at churches. Everyone goes to the big, hard falls, you know the names. There's documentaries written about these churches and people, and I kind of, they definitely did it to themselves, but I kind of feel for the churches that go through, these horrific, falls from grace, if you will. But while that certainly applies to what we're talking about, what I'm really talking about is you know, things that are a little more off the radar, if you will, and putting in some parameters so that you don't create a culture that lacks accountability. Because
Mm,
when you have a culture that lacks accountability, bad things can happen, and people
yeah.
can fall into patterns that are not helpful for the church and not helpful for them either. So, yeah, we've got a system that is a pretty tight system at West Bradenton. It's something that I'm glad that we've implemented. Josh, what do you do for, like, how do you? This sounds so imposing, but how do you
Mm.
hold your staff accountable? Like, it is kind of
Yeah.
imposing, but we have to do this. So, what do you do?
Yeah, well, let me speak theoretically out there, like in more broad strokes. But essentially, I think that it starts with a clear communication of what is expected. So these are some basic things that a lot of times it's surprising how often churches just don't have job descriptions. They don't like what are they supposed to be doing, and this helps on both sides of the equation. Another document like so I like to have like about three documents on this topic, but one is what is the job description. This is your 9 to 5. This is what is expected of you. Another document is like the values, and this is just the way that we interact with everybody. So it's going to be gospel centric, it's going to be sacrificial, we're going to speak with one voice, we're going to laugh loud, hard, and often. So you have your values. This needs to be communicated to the staff as well. And then the third idea that I would try to articulate in some way, however, is just what the certain culture is. I call it the culture. Um, you know, Sam, you're going to have different ways that you expect your staff to behave than I do. And I always tell my staff, I've got a document called the second culture. I don't I don't think that Sam is wrong for being the sort of boss that he is, nor is, this pastor down here or that pastor down here. I just want to communicate to my staff, this is the sort of boss that I am. These are the things that I don't like. These are the things I do like. These are the expectations. And so once all of that, I think what I'm saying is accountability begins with clear communication at the forefront. You need to let them know what they will be held accountable to. So that's something we do. Do you use something called a covenant, or is there something similar to that, or how does that work for y'all?
Yeah, we've got several layers of accountability. We have a covenant. Every member is expected to adhere to 7 expectations. Um, the staff, particularly the pastors, have a separate covenant in addition to the church member covenant. I've gotten some static over that. I don't care. Well, why would you have 2 different covenants? I'm like, you know what? I actually believe that pastors should be held above reproach. I think that we do have higher standards. I know that people disagree with me on that theologically. That's fine. I respect you. Yeah, I believe that I have a higher standard as a pastor. And so we have set what those standards are. These are things that the staff wrote of them for themselves. These are things that we as a group of pastors got together. It was a few years ago at this point where we just sat down and we said, okay, we don't have a system of accountability at West Bradenton. What should we do? This was in response to a moral failure on staff. And we sat down and we said, we need to protect ourselves better. Like we need some true accountability. So we put these expectations in a covenant and spelled it out. We also have some operational accountability standards above the covenant. So the covenant's a little more theological, a little more broad, but we have 5 key things that we require of all of our pastors and ministers. One is appropriate relationships. This is sort of like the Billy Graham rule, if you will. I know that gets a
Mm-hmm.
lot of hate and a lot of static, and I can understand some of the critiques. Hey, I get it. But let
Mm-hmm.
me just put it this way. Please don't be alone with people that you might end up being tempted with, right? So let's avoid those situations where where you are alone with someone and there could potentially be some temptation there. So just be careful, be very careful. There's wisdom in that. So that's the first thing,
Mm-hmm.
appropriate relationships. We also, secondly, require every pastor and minister to have at least one accountability partner inside the church and one accountability partner outside of the church, and that they communicate regularly.
Mm.
Thirdly, If it's a church device or if it's a church office, we have internet tracking and we have cameras. We don't do audio in the church because that's illegal, but we do have video pretty much all over the church. So we have those placed in offices, and we do require internet tracking on church devices. And we also say it's very important for your spouse to have full access to all of your other devices, including the ones
Yeah.
that aren't church devices.
Right.
The fourth one that's most controversial for us is we require tithing of all pastors and ministers.
Mm.
We know what they make because we pay them, and we're checking to make sure that they're tithing on that income. We obviously, if somebody's hurting financially, they've got medical bills or something, and just tell us, like, hey, guys, I'm not going to be able to tithe because I've got all these huge medical bills. Something happened. Okay, we'll work with you on that. Like, just be straight up about it. You're going through a season. We just need to know. And hey, maybe it's the case where the church helps you. Maybe you need to
Mhm.
be ministered too. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, assuming all else is fine, you should be tithing on your income, particularly church
Mhm.
income. So we check that.
Mhm.
And then we require church involvement. And that's the fifth one. So you got to be in a life group. You've got to volunteer at VBS. If we're expecting our church members to do it, guess what? Staff
Mhm.
should be doing it too. So those are the 5 operational accountability standards: appropriate relationships, accountability partners, internet tracking, giving checks, and regular church involvement. Which you would think that fifth one you wouldn't have to say, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen churches where there's a pastor and like this particular pastor never comes to anything.
Mhm.
Like, how do you not volunteer at VBS? How do you not lead a mission trip? How do you not go to Wednesday nights? Like, it's your job. So we just codified that. We don't really have an issue with it, but we did codify it.
Yeah. No, I've seen it. What about family? What does it ever extend to the spouse? I've
No.
seen situations where churches have not seen the spouse of the person of the staff member in months and months and months. I've seen situations where there's a staff member whose spouse is attending another church.
Yeah, that would be a conversation. So if I had somebody on staff and their spouse was a member of another church, that's a really strange situation. It's ill-advised, and likely needs correcting. Like I'm searching my brain as I'm talking. Like, when would that be appropriate? It's
Mm,
difficult for me to come up with any sort of example where that would be appropriate. It shows that there's a problem with the marriage. So, this isn't even an employment issue. This is a counseling issue. Like, your spouse is not, like, families should go to church together. You shouldn't split the family up.
hmm
And if your spouse can't come to our church, is their church hurt? That's where I would go immediately. Did somebody say something? Did something happen? And if that's the case, then we need to work through a reconciliation process. Um, so if we encounter that, we would approach it from a care perspective, not a
hmm
you know not a not with punishment, but with just questions like, hey, what is going on? But we don't hold spouses accountable to the same standards as the pastors and ministers. They're not employed by the church.
hmm
Now we would hope that they would want to be involved because, hey, you're married to somebody who's in ministry, so it looks
Part of it.
really bad. It
Hmm
looks really, really bad if you're not there. We can't force that. But yeah, it would definitely be conversations that I would be having with staff people if we never saw a spouse at church. That is
Yeah.
a problem. It's
Yeah.
certainly a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't put any of that other stuff on them, but we often say we do expect spouses to be active members of our church. The same sort of expectations we have on any active member, we expect your spouse to be as well. So that means, faithful attendance, serving somewhere in some way. It doesn't have to be in your ministry. It can be anywhere, and it can be in smaller doses. If somebody has a newborn, they don't have as much time or energy to devote to different ministries, but there's always a place to serve, always some setting to serve. So that's the requirements that we expect on that front. So what do you do? How does it actually work if you find out somebody's not showing up to work, or how do you hold them accountable? What's the system or Is it a conversation? Do you get a committee involved or deacons? What happens there?
Well, those are dangerous words. We're going to get the committee involved. That's
Oh,
like
I know.
striking terror in the heart of the individual, right? In our world, in our congregational Baptist world, the committee's getting
Hmm.
involved. It starts as a conversation, of course. So this is the case with this is an issue of church discipline, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about. Okay, there's a problem. That problem needs to be corrected. We absolutely start with the approach of, hey, we've noticed an issue. What's going on? Would you mind just walking us through your perspective on this? So you just want to assume the best of somebody. You approach it as if they're going to have a good explanation and that you'll be able to work through it. So you start there and it's just, hey, we noticed last 6 months you haven't given anything to the church. Did you know that? I mean, for all I know, they're like, well, my wife does the bills and like that credit card, we canceled that credit card. Oh my goodness. I guess we just didn't even notice. It could be
Hmm.
something as simple as that. So you don't want to come in too hard and too heavy with somebody. You just start hey, we've noticed this. What's going on? In almost every case, there's a good explanation or one that is, you know, adequate enough. And then they're reasonable and they're willing to work with you on it. And you just
Right.
move forward. In the cases where they don't want to work on the issue, okay, well, yes, that's where I would pull in the personnel committee, have them address the issue. That's where, deacons may get involved if it's something pretty serious. Where with accountability and with church discipline, you want to start this. You want the circles of impact to be as small as possible. You don't want to go blabbing about this to everybody. So you want to pull in as few people as possible to solve the problem. So
Hmm.
as more and more people get involved, obviously the issue gets more and more serious. And we've had some who were so obstinate that we had to fire them. Like
Yeah.
that, they just refused to follow through with what they said they would do. Don't forget, these are things that people sign up for on the front end. So if you're going to
Hmm.
come work at West Bradenton as a pastor, we're going to tell you up front, hey, if you have a church device, we're going to put internet tracking on it. Hey, we expect you to tithe. And if you don't want to do that, okay, fair enough. If you're like, I don't believe in the tithe, it's not my theological conviction. Like, okay, fine, respect that. You just can't work at our church.
Yeah.
You can't be employed here.
Hmm.
Um, so these are things that we set up as expectations on the front end, and if they don't follow through, well, that's a disciplinary action. And then ultimately, if they continue to be obstinate about it, then you just have to part ways. It's
Yeah.
it's really that simple.
Right, right. I would encourage you to, like I said before, communicate the expectations before. Also, build in systems. We have regular meetings, one-on-one sessions, and team meetings, in which you can, for lack of a better word, put on the boss hat. And like most of the time, you're a pastor or a minister, but there are times where you got to put on the boss hat and say, "Hey, you're not. You're. These are the office hours, man. You got to show up at office hours. That's the way that it works. Or you can't just buy a new iPhone every couple months. That's that's not allowed. And you know that. These are the policies. Those sort of things. And I think if you build that in to these are our monthly meetings, things that are not serious but need to be addressed, things that are not life threatening but need to be addressed, you can do it in a nice, comfortable, expected setting that says, hey, I hate doing this, but this is part of my job, and part of your job is doing this, and you're not. So we need to get that all in line. So I would say communicate first, build in natural flows where correction, coaching can happen. And you're going to avoid a lot of the problems. You're going to avoid a lot of the big blowups that everybody's afraid of. The other thing that I would say is, man, I have a friend in Austin, Kevin. He's a pastor there, and he says, we love you for free, but we pay you to do a job. When you fill out a W 2, the relationship changed. You are employed and you have an employer. So that needs to be something that like maybe everybody comes to terms on and clarifies and says, this isn't kicking you out of the church, but you didn't come to work for like 2 months and you refused. So now you don't work here anymore. But you can still come to worship service. We'll see you on Sunday. So there's just a difference there where people need to be grown up enough to know that this is different. It's not just like you get paid to do the same amount of volunteering you were doing. This is actually a part of your job now, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. I have no problem with imposing some of these standards on quote unquote employees. If you are getting any sort of paycheck from the church, now we have a lot of bivocational people, very part time people as well. They kind of have some different standards than the full time
Sure.
pastors.
Hmm.
But if you get any sort of paycheck from the church for any sort of reason, whether you're a contractor or whomever, you should be doing your absolute best. I mean, you are collecting funds for personal income through kingdom work. That is one of the biggest blessings on the planet, because obviously I'm going to preach whether I get paid or not. It's just my calling. And if God
Hmm.
says, well, go do it and do it for free, okay, it's my, then I would. But man, I'm blessed to be able to get paid to do something that is my calling. And not everyone in the church gets paid for what they do, what God has told them to do. So, yeah, if you're an employee, we're going to hold you to some high standards, because I'm going to have to stand before God someday. And
Hmm.
if everyone was just cashing checks for doing nothing, which I know that's not the case of most staff in most churches, right? But
Right.
man,
Right.
for those that are going to take advantage of the system, this isn't like, hey, we're just about grace and kindness and mercy here. It's like, well, you know what? That's true. And we will be gracious and kind and merciful, but we're just not going to pay you anymore because you're not
Hmm.
doing your job.
Yeah.
Um, and another thing that I'll say that I do is one-on-ones, about once a month with every staff person. We
Yeah.
meet. It's 30 minutes. It's just catch up time. How's your family? Hey, I know your husband was sick. How's he feeling? Hey, there was your daughter had surgery. How'd that go? Hey, what are you going to do for vacation? Make sure you take your vacation days. Those are the one-on-one times. It's not a time to bring out the hammer and accountability stuff, but I
Hmm.
get in tune with where people are, and I know, okay, that staff person, their spouse is really struggling with a major health issue. Okay, I'm very much in tune and communicating often with them. When they take off on a Thursday afternoon for a doctor's appointment, because it's a very serious thing, I know, like, okay, I can look past that, like, because that's a short term thing. They're going through a season, and those one on ones help me not to be, this tyrant, and to
Hmm.
show grace in those cases where, okay, I know what they're going through. I know to look past this particular issue because they've just got a big thing going on in their life. And so I
Hmm.
would encourage you, if you're going to have these high standards and to hold staff accountable, which you should, you also, as if you're a lead pastor or an executive pastor, somebody manages a team, you also need to be having that regular pastoral conversation so that you know where they are spiritually, you know what's going on in their life. Otherwise, you will either default to complete laziness, you never hold anyone accountable to anything, or you'll just be a tyrant. And
Hmm.
the way you balance that is just to be in regular communication pastorally with your staff. Or if you don't have a staff, your key church members, right? You could
Hmm.
also apply this to your key leaders in the church.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would encourage pastors, ministers, especially top level leadership, to find out in your system and in your structure what exactly is the avenue for correction. I mean, inadvertently, a lot of churches are set up in such a way that like the hiring and the firing is done through a committee. And so the let's just use the pastor for example. The pastor can't fire anybody, technically, can't fire anybody, and doesn't really have the authority to hire anybody, and yet also maybe doesn't do their evaluation. Maybe that's the personnel team is doing the evaluation or something like that. In that sort of setting, you really need to have a very clear conversation with whoever the leadership is, and the understanding of roles, because what you end up doing is being the like all the negative and no, you have all bark and no bite. You can't do anything about it. And so you just are enforcing rules for other people, nameless people, off in a meeting somewhere that these people don't see. It really puts you in a bad spot to where you end up looking like a tyrant, like to use your word there. And so I would encourage conversations that say, okay, so if I have a staff person who is regularly not performing to the level that we've expected of them to do, what can I do? What am I allowed to do? If I can't just fire them, can I take away this or take away that? Or can we have corrective measures that I know how to enact these things? You need to know how to enact those things. In most churches, the lead pastor is not You're just not able to just fire or just take something away. You got to have some accountability, and I think that's for good reasons. Those things are in there for a good reason, but you need to know kind of where the lines are drawn.
Yeah, I have to work with my personnel committee on hiring and
Mhm.
firing. They give
Yeah.
me a lot of leeway, and I have a certain level of authority on a day to day basis with staff. But I just can't let anybody go, and
Hmm.
I'm okay with that. I think that that's a pretty good system. It works for us, and there's different ways to govern a church. You may have a board of elders, you may have a committee. You know,
Yeah.
If you're Presbyterian, obviously that works in a completely different way. If you're Methodist, there's an appointment system. You and I tend to talk more from a congregational perspective, but what I will say is this: make sure that you work within whatever system is there. But if you want to change the system, that's fine. Just go through the proper channels to change it.
Hmm.
Don't leave things in an employee handbook or personnel manual or in your bylaws and then operate differently. You can get in a whole lot of legal trouble if
Hmm.
you let somebody go and you do it in a way that's outside of your bylaws or outside of your employee handbook.
Hmm.
Operate within the system that you have, and if you need to change it, there's nothing wrong with changing bylaws, employee manuals, whatever they are. Just make sure that you do that and that you do it in a way that is prescribed within that system. So
Hmm.
it's okay to change your system, just change the system in a way that you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you do fire somebody, yeah, it could be heartache for you. You could be in legal jeopardy, and put the church in a very bad place. If somebody is being obstinate and being a troublemaker, um, and they're willing to do that in the church, then who knows what they're willing to do when you let them go, right? So just
Hmm.
be careful there and make sure you follow your own policies.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a number of listeners that are like, well, we're about to hire somebody. This is going to be our first staff person, or we've just recently hired one or two staff people, and we never really had these personnel policies before. Those are great things to build out. I'm sure the folks at Church Answers can help you build those things out, consulting, and even just the discussion boards. Those sort of things can really help you a lot in that. What I would encourage you to think through is every relationship, outside of your marriage and your children, they come to an end eventually. Your student minister probably won't retire your student minister. So think through how the relationship should be resolved in a healthy way. If you need to fire them, what is the process for firing them? How does that work? What are the steps that are very clear? And kind of think through that. That's going to save you a world of heartache. I always say bylaws, personnel policies, all that is what we write when we're getting along for when we don't get along. That's why you need it. And so think at the time when you're getting along, about the time where you might not get along and how to protect everybody before the game starts. So that's just my final 2 cents on holding your staff accountable.
Well, we'll take those 2 cents and we'll close it out. And we certainly want to thank Church Answers, particularly Church Answers University, a fast growing school that offers ministry training and education at a fraction of the cost of a typical degree program. The school currently offers certification in Christian ministry and a certification in women's discipleship. By the way, Jackie, Josh's wife, helped do the women's discipleship program, and it is top notch.
Mm-hmm.
She is far superior to Josh when it comes to content creation. So
It's true.
you definitely it's definitely want to go take a look at it. Here's the deal: we still have. And the reason that I say this is because we record 2 episodes back to back. So I really don't know if any of the scholarships got taken that I mentioned on the previous episode, but we'll do our very best to honor them. So 5 scholarships are available. These are half off scholarships of a $748 value. So with Church Answers University, it's a self-paced program. It's online, it's digital, but you get your books included. And this is a chance to just really, take advantage of an incredible deal. If you want this half off scholarship for Church Answers University, email Matt, M-A-T-T, at churchanswers.com. Again, Matt, M-A-T-T, at churchanswers.com. Just tell him, hey, I heard about it on the radio, heard about it on the podcast. I would like an opportunity to be eligible for one of those 5 scholarships, and we'll be glad to get you connected there. So yeah, email Matt and tell him about your interest in Church Answers University.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. You are why we do what we do. We hope that you have learned something today. and you pass it on. We'll catch you next week.